It had been 2 years since the last one and my mind was going crazy. Living in the hills outside a small town didn't make things easier. I couldn't just pop down to the one and only bar to try to pick up some guy, everyone knew me. On top of that, I had Sandy to think about. After her father had died in a motorcycle accident 2 years before, she had become even quieter than her usual withdrawn self. She was my stepdaughter, but I loved her dearly. Her mother had died when she was in her early teens, and when her father, John, met me, she took it hard in the beginning. She still never called me Mom, it was always Nina. She was 19 and only 10 years younger than I. Over time we had become more like sisters than stepmother and stepdaughter, and the death of John had made us even closer. When she graduated from high school, we had decided we should move to the city where she could go to university, but for the meantime, we were stuck in this hell hole. Sandy was very independent, and when I walked into the kitchen I saw that she had had breakfast and done her dishes. She usually left before I woke up and left a pot of coffee for me. John had left us well off with a life insurance policy, and since the accident had been called a mechanical failure and the Ducati Monster had only been 6 weeks old, the company paid us a large settlement so we wouldn't sue. But what was money when all we wanted was John back? I put most of it into a trust fund for Sandy, which would be released when she went to university, and the rest we used to live off. After breakfast, I did what I usually did, cleaned up, pottered in the garden, went for a walk and then the washing. As I walked into Sandy's room with her clothes, I noticed her computer was on. Sometimes she was a bit distracted, so I decided not to tell her off. When I walked up to her desk to turn it off, I noticed she had been using the cam. The other person's camera was in an elevated position and it looked down on a bed. From what I could see, it was a young man's room, girly posters, a few of cars and weapons. I wondered who it could be, since as far as I knew Sandy wasn't dating anyone and never had. She was a pretty girl with thick dark brown hair past her shoulders, an oval face with kind blue eyes and a button for a nose. She had inherited her father's height and was close to 5'10". I had spoken to her about boys and dating, but it seemed that she didn't care. The high school she attended was small, and I guess the option of dating material was limited. I was secretly happy about it because I didn't want to deal with all the drama that a boyfriend could bring. I turned off the computer and decided to ask her later on. These days one had to be careful, there were so many men out there in cyberspace that could convince an innocent girl to do all kinds of crap on the screen. "Hi, Nina. I am home," I heard Sandy call from the vestibule. I got up from the sofa and met her at the kitchen door. "Hi, how was school?" She hung up her light spring jacket on the hook on the wall. "Are you hungry?" I asked. "Sure, I could eat a sandwich." "Good, come with me, I need to ask you something." When the sandwich was ready and Sandy had taken her first bite, I sat down opposite her. "You left your computer on again." "Oh, I am sorry." "Don't worry about it, but what I wanted to ask you was, who were you camming with?" She stopped her hand, holding the sandwich an inch from her mouth, and her eyes began to move. She was coming up with something, and it wasn't the truth. I knew that look, she was going to lie to me. "Oh, I cammed with Aaron last night, we are doing a school project together." I had never met this Aaron guy, not even heard him mentioned. And what kind of project is that?" She took a bite and after swallowing said, "Global warming." "And you need to cam for that?" "Sure, he is doing all the graphs and I am writing the text. When he prints them out he shows them to me using the cam. Why not simply email them to you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, I guess we could do that." I leaned forward and took her hand in mine. "I trust you, Sandy, I just want you to be safe, there are so many freaks out there." She giggled. "Yeah, I know." She left and I sat at the table thinking. She had lied about something, but I had no clue about what, and I wanted to find out. That evening Sandy went to her room around 9 in the evening. She said she was going to cam with Aaron and I said good night. While sipping on a glass of wine, I watched a movie on the TV. When it was over around 2 hours later, I decided it was time for bed, and after leaving my glass in the sink, I turned off all the lights and went upstairs. Passing Sandy's room, I saw the light was still on inside, so I pressed my ear to the door and heard her giggle. Frowning, I bent down and looked through the keyhole. Her desk was positioned so that I could see half of the computer screen and part of her back. On the screen I could make out someone lying on the bed that I had seen earlier. I quickly left and went into my own room, where I sat down on the bed deep in thought. My stepdaughter was camming with a guy. Was that wrong? God damn, yes it was. Was it my business? Yes, she was still a young girl. Should I confront her now? No, it was better to do it in the morning. My biggest concern was not the fact that she did, which was fine and healthy. What did worry me was if the guy on the other end was recording. That could lead to blackmail and harassment. I had a hard time falling asleep that night, but I eventually did. I had decided to confiscate her laptop and give her a 2-week grounding for being stupid and putting herself in a dangerous position. "Hi, you are up early," Sandy said when she walked into the kitchen the following morning. I turned around from the stove and smiled at her. "Hi, honey. Did you sleep well? I decided it was my turn to make you breakfast." She was dressed in a pink tank top. Her hair was tousled and she had a sleepy look on her face. "Thanks, Nina. That's nice of you." When we had eaten for a while, I cleared my throat. "Sandy, I am grounding you." She looked up from her plate. "Why? What did I do?" I sighed. "I am also confiscating your laptop. I know what you did last night with that guy on cam. Aaron was his name, I believe." Sandy blushed. "Were you spying on my, that's so sick. Language, young lady, and I did not spy on you. I happened to walk past your door and I heard you. I looked through the keyhole and saw what you did. That is so unfair. That is spying." I picked up my empty plate. "End of discussion, get ready for school and I'll see you later." She stormed out, and a few minutes later and I heard the entrance door slam shut. I did the dishes and then decided it was a good time as any to get her laptop. She had left it on again, and as I walked up to it I saw a guy moving around on the screen. He was a fine specimen of a young man with broad shoulders, thick arms, and legs. Something came over me and I quickly turned off Sandy's cam and sat down at the desk. This way I could watch him without him seeing me. When he turned around I sighed. His face was angular with deep-set eyes and curly black hair. Suddenly there was a ping, and when I turned back to the screen a text had appeared in a box. "Hi, still there?" I began to sweat. The guy thought I was Sandy. Then another text came up. "Hey, what's happened to your cam?" I thought for a second and then typed. "Not sure, I have to check later." "No time now." "Okay, do you want to see him, one more time?" I figured I knew what he meant. "Sure." He leaned forward and typed with one hand. "My name is Lisa, and my husband Ed and I are both 42 years old. We dated all through high school. We were married right out of high school and had twin boys who are now out of college and married. We recently sold our large home in the Cleveland suburbs and moved to a townhome in the city, so we would be closer to our jobs. I worked while Ed attended college and he is now a mechanical engineer with a manufacturing company. I am a paralegal at a prestigious law firm. Ed's firm started a new program where they expected all their professional people to volunteer to mentor students either in high school or college. Ed chose to sign up for the program at a community college in the city near our home, where he could help students who hoped to major in math and science. We had not gotten to know many of our neighbors yet at the time of this story, but we soon met the son of a family that lived in a town home just 3 doors from us. Most often the mentoring was done in the mentor's home, which meant that I also wanted to meet the student who would be spending so much time with Ed in our home. I had to work a little late that Monday night, so Ed went to the first meeting of the mentoring program at the appointed time in the student center. I was to follow shortly thereafter. Ed found out that the students were assigned mentors based primarily on the area of major study, with a secondary consideration being how close the student lived to the mentor. Ed was assigned to help a 20-year-old guy named Kendall who was just starting his second year of college. We found out that he lives with his parents just 3 doors from our home in one of the other town homes. He had good grades in his first year of community college but was then having difficulty with some of his second-year math and science classes. I entered the student center about 20 minutes after Ed arrived, and I saw them sitting at a table near the window. I had never met Kendall before, and Ed didn't see me at first. But as I was approaching the table, but still about 30 feet away, Kendall looked me up and down and got a big smile on his face, and then made some comments to Ed. Ed then looked my way, and when he saw it was me he got an irritated look on his face. When I reached the table and introduced myself as Lisa, Ed's wife, Kendall looked very embarrassed and stammered as he introduced himself to me. Things seemed a little tense between Ed and Kendall after that, but we continued our meeting and got along pretty well. We then concluded that Ed would be Kendall's mentor. It was agreed that we would begin the relationship with from 1 to 2 hour meetings on Tuesday and Thursday evenings at our home. We would then increase or decrease the meetings as needed, based on the problems Kendall was having. Ed and I got home at about the same time, and we had time to watch 2 of our favorite TV shows before getting ready for bed. I noticed that Ed was quiet and moody when we got home. I tried to find out what was wrong. I asked, "What is the matter, honey? You've been pretty quiet since we got home, and you also seemed a little irritated during our meeting with Kendall." He looked at me and said, "Well, I was debating whether or not to tell you this, but since you asked, I might as well be honest about it. When you were approaching our table at the student center, Kendall looked up and saw you before I did. He said, 'Look at that woman walking this way. She is a beautiful, older woman.' I was obviously irritated at hearing him say those things about you, especially since we had just met and were about to enter into a mentoring relationship. But the strange thing was that, at the same time, it made me proud that he found you so attractive. So now I need to sort this out in my mind." I didn't want to deny him my help, just for stupidly making those comments without knowing you are my wife. I was shocked at hearing what Kendall said about me, but I was also flattered that such a young man found me so attractive. I at 5 feet and 5 inches tall and weighing 125 pounds. Also, my short, dishwater blonde hair and green eyes must have been attractive to him. But I decided that I should try to defuse the situation, especially since Ed would be working with him starting the next evening. I said, "Don't let it bother you, honey. He's just a horny young man like most guys his age. He just lacked the discretion to keep his thoughts to himself. Anyway, just like you, I do find it a little flattering that he found me so attractive and sexy." Ed replied, "I admit that I do feel the same way, which is why I agreed to begin mentoring him. But, I'm also a little bothered about comment." I could hardly wait for Kendall to come over for his first mentoring session with Ed. I really wasn't totally sure why I felt that way, but it must have had something to do with comment and the fact that he found me attractive. Ed and I both got home about 6 p.m. and had a quick dinner, since Kendall was scheduled to arrive at about 7 p.m. It was the beginning of the fall but still pleasantly warm in Cleveland. I put on a yellow sundress and Ed was wearing shorts and a polo shirt. I spent a little more time on my makeup than I usually do. Kendall arrived right on time at 7 p.m., and he was dressed in a t-shirt and loose-fitting athletic shorts, just like most young men his age would be dressed. I answered the door and showed him into our dining room, where Ed was waiting for him. I also noticed that Ed saw him staring at me. They got down to work and started going over some math problems that Kendall was having trouble with. At about 8 p.m. Ed called out to me where I was watching TV in the living room and asked if I could make them a snack and join them while they ate. I went into the kitchen and brought out soft drinks and some cookies that I had picked up from the store and sat down at the table. Ed and Kendall were sitting next to each other on one side of the table, so I sat across from them. We just chatted as we had our refreshments. I glanced up at his face and saw that he was looking right at me. I also saw Ed look away. I finally went back into the living room and watched TV until I heard Ed take Kendall to the door at about 9 p.m. Ed came into the living room after letting Kendall out and was very excited when he said, "Lisa, you look so hot tonight." I could hardly believe what I was hearing from Ed. I decided that it would be best to go to bed and continue the conversation. So, I said, let's get to bed and talk about this some more. Wednesday and Thursday passed very slowly, but finally 7 p.m. arrived and Kendall rang the doorbell right on time. Ed had just called to say that he would be about 15 minutes late, so I answered the door. I welcomed him in, saying, "Hi, Kendall, come on in." Ed just called to say that he would be about 15 minutes late. Let's just go into the dining room and talk until he arrives. We sat at the table and chatted about how school was going for him, but I was finding it hard to concentrate on the conversation. After about 15 minutes I thought that I would test his interest in me. I asked, "Tell me, Kendall, is it true what Ed told me you said about me on Monday night when I was walking up to the table? Do you really think that I'm pretty?" Kendall was stunned and sat in silence for a few moments as he contemplated what the repercussions might be of me knowing what he said. Then he nervously began to speak and said, "Mrs. L, I'm so sorry about that. I didn't know that you were Mr. L's wife, and I shouldn't have said those things. Can you ever forgive me for that?" Then I said, "Well, first off, you should call me Lisa, and secondly." At that moment the phone rang and I stopped speaking to answer it. It was Ed calling to tell me that there was a problem with an important project at work. He wouldn't be able to get home until about 10 p.m. So I said, "Okay, honey, I'll let Kendall know. I'll let him know he can come back tomorrow night." I thought about that opportunity for a few seconds and made the decision on my own to see how far I could get with Kendall. I said to Kendall, "That was Ed telling me that he's sorry, but he won't be home in time to work with you tonight. He'll be able to see you tomorrow night if you want to. Do you want to leave now, or would you like to spend some time with me and answer my questions?" Kendall asked, "What are you saying? You aren't mad at me for my comments about you?" I replied, "No, I'm not mad. In fact, I'm quite flattered that a young man like you finds an older woman like me so attractive. I'll ask you again, do you really think I'm pretty?" Kendall smiled and said, "Lisa, you're so beautiful and sexy, and I'd love you." I replied, "Well then, let's go upstairs. We've got 3 hours before Ed gets home, and that will give us enough time to get to know one another really well." Kendall could barely keep his composure as I took his hand and led him upstairs. I was amazed at the quick transition I had made from being a faithful wife to the point where I was preparing to cheating with young man. Can you guess what happens next? I looked over at the clock and saw that it was 9:30 p.m. So, I looked up at Kendall and said, "I really enjoyed you, but you need to get going now. Ed will be home in a little while and it would be best that he not find you, at least now until we talk about what happened here tonight." Kendall looked very surprised that Ed would probably be okay with what we had done. He said, "Lisa, do you mean that Ed will actually approve? That's pretty nasty, but I guess everybody is different." I then said, "You might be right about that, but we need to take this one step at a time. See you tomorrow night at 7 p.m. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew it was 45 minutes later when I heard Ed come in the front door. Then I yelled out, "I have a surprise for you."